So we had some really fascinating discussions yesterday and a very high level of science that offers extraordinary potential for human beings. How would you start thinking about presenting these kinds of challenging ideas to the audiences you have? And maybe, Scott, you want to go first, and then Pere after that.
Well, we're speaking at a difficult time when we talk about presenting issues, and particularly the more technical they are. We have to convey them to people without oversimplifying them, because I think many of the questions, and a number of them raised by Just We Saw, are not simple to resolve at all, and any more than with your father's perplexity about whether or not to have teeth straightened, because it meant something culturally. In any event, and I worry about that at this point because the news business in Europe and the United States has become overwhelmingly fractious, and I'm afraid subject to fraud. And I worry about that intruding into the way people get information, or I should say the way people choose to get information, because now they can decide what they want to know and what bias they want it to massage, and then find the information to support it. I mean, I don't even have to mention the name of an American public figure who was indicted in Miami yesterday to make that point. About 20% of people in the United States who identify themselves as Democrats support a candidate for president who doesn't believe in the efficacy of vaccines. And I think they disregard what they don't believe in or don't accept, and then pick and choose. So from a certain point of view, this is just the Democratic exercise. The challenge that we're going to have in the news industry, I think, is trying to figure out the best ways of communicating all of this to an audience that will take them along in it step by step. I mean, I think we both, these are some huge questions with which we're going to have to grapple, and if we don't grapple with them at one point, in a kind of unheated atmosphere, I'm afraid the worst things will happen. I mean, the good part is that what we used to consider, I think, many diseases might now simply be adjustments. No more bothersome, I hate to keep harping on your family, than orthodontia.
Right.
And perhaps not even, I could be corrected on this, perhaps not even requiring medical personnel per se to be able to fulfill them. On the other hand, they're actually a huge question. I mean, when in the United States alone, it costs between $80 billion and $130 billion to develop the COVID vaccine. And I don't think anyone, that's not true. The people who support, there are lots of people who doubt that was money well spent. But that raises one of those questions I think the press must investigate. If you're raising that kind of money to combat COVID, why not cancer? Get rid of that in 6 months. Why not diabetes? Why not shingles?
And as we heard yesterday, the mRNA vaccines offer great promise for combating.
Well, a great promise, but why not declare it a national priority and get it done in 6 months, as we did, in COVID? And I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, it also, and I say this as a sports fan, raises what I'll refer to as the Oscar Pistorius question. A lot of you might remember Oscar Pistorius. He was the great South African sprinter who he was called the Blade Runner because he had prosthetic devices that were steel blades, and he ran on them, and he won a number of gold medals. I said to Francis earlier, he is unfortunately now in prison, but actually what I mean is he was convicted of murder, so perhaps fortunately he's in prison. But in any event, there were people who were very uncomfortable competing against him because they felt that he had received an unnatural enhancement. This is something that we're going to have to resolve at every level.
Right.
And I mean down to grammar school. I think there are lots of questions that we need to contend with, and we're very fortunate in the press. All we have to do is ask the questions. We don't have to resolve anything.
So Scott raised questions that, I mean, huge questions about trust in science. They've become particularly acute in the United States because of the political situation. What do you feel your responsibility is in taking these very complex ideas that we heard yesterday and communicating them to your audiences?
It depends on who hires you, no? Because, for example, I work in different media. I'm a freelancer, so I do television, or I do radio, or publish books. You have different audience, different formats. If I had to cover things that were brought to the conversation yesterday, I would do it differently to the different places that the radio show or television. But if there is something in common, you were mentioning how we simplify these complex situations. First, we have to simplify. That's something that seems obvious, but you don't do it.
Right.
And we saw it yesterday, no? And you talk not all of you, but many of you talk very fast. You want to explain a lot of things in the short time that you have, and you know that this is not good communication, but you don't care.
Well, you know what? I mean, what we did, the exercise we did by asking everybody for their headline, essentially, was I had a number of people saying this is really difficult. It's difficult to come out of a day like yesterday, right, and say.
But then you see what I want to say. It's
Time will tell. That's always a good line. Time will tell.
But
deadlines get in the way of that.
You need something to start, or a story. Or, for example, from yesterday, we probably all remember, because there is a video, and we saw this with Maricruz, the tremors. We remember that, because there is a story, a specific person, and we have a video.
Right.
Or, for example, I'm with Mario, that explained something very cool at the last presentation with data from autistic person and microbes in the brain. It's not the same that you show. That you explain that there are 30 people in us. It's more scientifically is better this. You have the data, there are 30 people, and these receive the placebo. But when you see a specific person with it has more impact. What I'm trying to say is that we don't have the same rules, the journalist or the science communication review, and we can plant a seed, something to start that is very compelling, shocking somehow, and then from there, depending if you have more time or less, you expand it more or less, and you go more into the detail or less. But we always have to find something to start that connects directly to the audience.
So the most shocking headline in some ways that came up yesterday was the CRISPR baby, right? The discussion of the CRISPR baby. I mean, there's a great temptation in journalism to go for the shocker. What do you?
Well, can I share something I noticed yesterday? In what seemed to me to be a comprehensive list of those, and I don't even know. I don't want to know if I want to say illness or, God forbid, disorder or what. But I noticed it was listed on the screen that. One of the things that could be, and I'll just call it a thing, which I ordinarily discourage in journalism, that one of the things that could be corrected genetically would be Down syndrome. I think responsible journalists see something like that on a list, and you begin to wonder. People and families who are affected by Down syndrome deeply believe it is not a disability, it's nothing to be corrected for. On the contrary, they believe that they have certain wisdom and human qualities that have been imparted by that. So why would you want to, do we really want a world where people without Down syndrome, it also occurred to me cerebral palsy. I just interviewed somebody on our show who has done a memoir. He has cerebral palsy. It's called Leg. And he says, yes, there have been some rough moments, but you know what? I've learned a lot. I wouldn't trade that for anything.
Right.
Do we really want a world in which cerebral palsy, or more to the point, people who have learned from cerebral palsy aren't around? And is it a short step from correcting for Down syndrome or cerebral palsy to depression? And I think those are all very lively questions that we need to address.
What else are you asking me?
Well, I was wondering if you had a follow-up on that. This is a discussion that I've come across.
You can correct me. That would be
often.
You can correct me now.
No.
In the disability community, I've done stories in the disability community in the United States. Cochlear implants in the deaf community are not something that deaf people necessarily want to have, because many don't perceive deafness as a disability, but part of their identity and culture.
No, of course, this is an interesting story. There are many interesting stories. We are all used to explain things every week. But I would say that challenge and opportunity. Challenge, we said, is complex opportunity. But the opportunities is something new. There's constantly new knowledge.
Right.
As a journalist, it's not complicated to find the stories on science. It's more difficult to find stories in other fields of journalism sometimes. Because from yesterday, I would be able to write a lot of stories of each of you. No, there is this new knowledge, and it's very well connected to the, in this case, what we discussed yesterday, well connected to the human experience, to health, but also to solutions. If you talk about energy or the synthetic biology applied to industrial fields, so it's in the optimistic side, and then there are the risks that also, from a journalistic point of view, is interesting to analyze the risks, and then the situations like this that you were explaining. So we have different angles. It's important not to mix, not to try to explain a lot of things in a single story, because if we want to explain all the possibilities and the risks and the situation, we get lost, or the audience get lost. No? Right. So it's like, depending of the time that you have. So if you are writing a book, or if you are writing a long story, because you have time to analyze more aspects. But if not, it's like you have 15 minutes in a radio or 13 minutes in a TV show. Focus on a few ideas and give examples, and think not in your colleagues, but in the person that will be listening to you.
May I say?
Our time's up, so we should...
Can I say one thing?
I'm noticing our time's up.